All right, so thank you for tuning into Chompin at the Bit. This is episode number 86. I am Kyle Edwards, of course. And I thought this episode have a little bit of fun and kind of take a look back at 90s NBA. Know what you're probably thinking. What's making me want to talk about 90s NBA today? Well, I'll tell you why. So, I did that episode about KG saying guys 20 years ago wouldn't have been able to play today's game. From that, 20 years ago was 2001, but I took that as like late 90s, early 2000 guys. Kind of since then, I have been thinking about a lot, about the 90s and what the game looked like then compared to how it looks now. So what made me really think about it was there were a couple of occasions where, I don't know if you guys remember, but it was like a couple of nights ago, the Nuggets were playing, who were they playing? Might have been the Jazz or something. And there's a late game situation where I think the Nuggets caused a turnover, came down, it was like a 4-on-1. And literally all four guys stopped at the 3-point line. Mind you, they were down by 2. So clearly a layup there would have forced overtime or whatever. So the four of them stopped at the 3-point line. I think the one guy who was back on defense stepped up to Jamal Murray because, I think the four guys were Jamal Murray. There was Michael Porter, Campazzo, I think is his name, and then Monte Morris. So I think Murray was coming down the middle of the floor. I believe Morris was to his left. Campazzo was to his right, and then Porter was to his far right. So he kicked it to Campazzo, who obviously took the 3, missed it. They ended up losing the game. And it's just funny that, that is where a lot of late game situations, that's what it comes down to in the NBA now. Whereas if you looked at 90s, a 4-on-1 turned into a layup all the time or a dunk, So it was just interesting, the dynamic and the vast change in philosophy because, as we've advanced further into the game, more and more analytics are becoming part of the game. So with that, it's analytically better to shoot a 3 than like a long 2. Only because the risk reward is you make a 3, you get 3 points. A deep 2, if you make it, you get 2, sure. But analytically, they'd rather see you take that extra step back, shoot a 3. So, whereas 90s, it was all about kind of getting easy baskets, only because defenses were a lot more physical back then. And, the way the rules were, you could hand check. And, you could use your body a lot more in defense than you can today. So, if you have a 4-on-1 break, and you have a wide open lane to the hoop, you're going to take that because it's an easy basket. So that, and then last night I was watching the Trailblazers Lakers game, and there was a play with Damian Lillard where he took a 3. He came down, he landed on Horton Tucker's foot and was, walking around gingerly for a little bit, which today's game, that is now called a flagrant foul. Which I get it because, they had the instance a couple of years ago with Zaza Pachulia going underneath Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard ended up rolling his ankle. He was out for like the rest of the series, and then that series turned on its head and worked in Golden State's favor or whatever. So I get it. They put it in to protect the players once they're off their feet. At that point, they're vulnerable. So, yeah. But it wasn't a call in the 90s. And I feel like I don't remember that many guys really landing on people's feet when they took jump shots. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. So, and I guess another aspect of that is today's game, you can't really contest on jump shots because of that same rule. Because if you go up in the air, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to contest a shot, avoid the offensive player's body, and not land in their airspace. There's too many factors at work. So you'll see a lot of times 3-pointers are being shot with little contest. I mean, a guy might put a hand up, and if they could get up to your face, fine. If not, you kind of just have your free space to shoot. And I think that has dramatically affected the game as well, because, you know, you have guys who, yes, shooters today are better than back in the day. And that's only because it's more a part of the game now than it was back then. You know, back then you'd have, I'm talking about the 90s, you know, you might have a guy or two who were 3-point specialists, but you have today where you can have full starting fives where they all shoot the 3. So definitely a big difference there. But I say all that to say, so for me, I really got into basketball in the 90s. I mean, I was born mid-80s, but all I really remember about 80s basketball was Lakers, Celtics. And that basically defined the whole decade. I mean, I know there was more than that, but to me, I mean, like I said, I was a little kid. So, and being a Celtics fan, I knew Celtics Lakers was the big deal in the 80s. I have seen, of course, some like ESPN Classic, which I don't know if that's still a thing, but I would watch games there, and you just saw a different type of intensity and physicality then. But like I said, I really started following the 90s. And I kind of think as, I guess the NBA demographic gets younger or fans become further distanced from the 90s, I feel like the way the 90s get talked about, it was just Jordan and the Bulls, and that's it. And I think that's just a like gross, I guess, discrimination against the league then, because there were a lot of actually really good teams in the 90s, but yeah, they got overshadowed because, you know, the Bulls won 6 titles in the decade, so everybody's just like, well, the rest of the league must have been trash. And it was actually far from that. It was just that, you know, Jordan and Pippen, Phil Jackson were just that much better at, you know, executing and just doing whatever it takes to win back then, that they were just the most successful team of the decade. So I kind of want to use this episode to talk about some of the things I just missed from the 90s. And who knows, maybe I'll kind of educate some of you on some of the other teams from the 90s besides Jordan and the Bulls. So I guess we'll go ahead and kick that off. And I guess the first thing I missed about the 90s, I mean, I guess you have to start with Jordan and the Bulls. Now, you know, we got a little bit of a look into it with the Last Dance documentary from ESPN, which if you haven't watched it, you should watch it. Great. Because you really see like the inner workings of that team. And I believe that followed the 98 team, of course, because that was the last title they won in the 90s, where basically all the guys knew that was going to be it for them. You know, front office was talking about, well, front office, you know, I mean, this was in the series, but Well, actually, it was just 2 episodes. So, but front office told Phil Jackson, "Hey, no matter what you do this year, you're done." Which, gotta say, kind of bold talk. But so yeah, so a lot of the players didn't like that. Some of them were getting a little older and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so 90s. If you're gonna talk 90s, you got to talk about the Bulls. And what you just like about them was, I guess, Jordan and Pippen, because even Jordan will tell you that Pippen was just as big of a part of that as he was. But the two of them just, I mean, they dominated. Let's just call it what it is. They did dominate, but they did beat a lot of good teams. I mean, the fact that they went to 6 finals, never a Game 7. I think they rarely had Game 7s throughout their playoff runs. And it's not like it was all the same guys every year, because they had guys who left the group, came back in, which is probably why, well, part of the reason why they had 2 3-peats, so they kind of like 2 different versions of themselves. They also had to deal with their star player leaving in the middle of it for 2 years. Well, I think it was like a year and a half, but basically 2 years to play baseball or whatever else was involved with that. I mean, his dad died and that kind of stuff. So they dealt with that. And then he leaves. Those couple of years, other teams really come into the mix and feel like it could be their time to take over. But then Jordan comes back, and that first year, because he came back like in the middle of the season, he was rusty. They didn't do it that year, but then the following year, in the next 3 years at that point, they pick up right where they left off with the first 3-peat, get a second 3-peat, and we all remember the lasting image, him crossing over, I keep want to call him Byron Russell, but I think it was Brian Russell, pulling up, hitting that free throw jumper for the win, giving them number 6, and that was it. So, missed the Bulls and that domination. Even as a Celtics fan, I appreciated watching the Bulls. Another thing I missed from the 90s, Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp. Now, they were a team that I loved in the 90s. Because Payton was basically the embodiment of every guy on the street ball court. Payton, when he was playing, he was talking nonstop trash. He was great defensively. I think he was kind of a little underrated offensively. He wasn't that big of a shooter, but he was kind of your first, iteration of point guards who would post up. You had like Payton and Mark Jackson did it. I think John Stockton would post up a little bit, but yeah, it's kind of the age of a little bit bigger point guards down low. When they played out in the fast break transition, you always knew an alley-oop was coming to Shawn Kemp. Shawn Kemp had crazy hops. He was throwing it down with authority. And it was just a fun time sitting back and watching them play on TV. So, definitely missed this Seattle teams. I was glad when they made their finals appearance in the 96 finals against the Bulls. Unfortunately, they lost 4-2. But of the teams that the Bulls went up against, I feel like that was the one team I thought could really have a chance to beat them. Because it wasn't just Payton and Kemp. You had Detlef Schrempf. What's the big man? Sam Perkins, I think, was on that team. Who was maybe one of the first big men who strictly played out on the perimeter. He was a deadly 3-point shooter. You had George Karl as their coach. So, Nick McMillan. Yeah, McMillan and Payton in the backcourt was fun to watch. So, miss Seattle teams from then. Another thing I miss from the 90s. Now, I'm sure some of you will connect with this. You remember like the NBA on NBC broadcast from the 90s and that iconic music? I mean, of course, I probably can't play it with copyright or whatever. I don't know. But you'd sit there. It'd be like, I think you mainly heard that was that like Sunday when they had like their Sunday kind of game of the week, and as soon as you heard that music play, you automatically knew what time it was. 90s basketball on NBC. Loved it. And kind of a side note with that, in NBA Inside Stuff in the 90s was a legit dope show to watch. I think it was one of those episodes that they were doing where Ahmad Rashad, I think, was interviewing Shaquille O'Neal. I believe he broke a backboard when they were during the interview or something. I remember that. It was hilarious. But that was Saturday. I believe NBA Inside Stuff came on like Saturday at like noon. Something like that. Must see TV. Love that. Miss that. I think they still do Inside Stuff. I'm not sure. At least like a couple of years ago, I know Grant Hill was on there with Kristen Ledlow, but I didn't really watch it. So, but yeah, missed that. Then on that topic, miss Penny Hardaway. Yeah. That Magic team that lost to the Rockets had that Penny Hardaway, that a young Shaq, which that was a dynamic duo back then. You had 3D, Dennis Scott. You had Nick Anderson. I was kind of like a low-key fan of Nick Anderson. Not really sure why, but I don't know. Some reason I really like Nick Anderson's game, but they were a classic team that was kind of too young for the moment. I've heard the stories about, I think the Magic won the first game, and after the first game, they were like partying and like living it up. The Rockets, mind you, were the defending champion. They had just come off a year where they beat the Knicks in the finals. So, the Rockets had that championship pedigree. Like I said, the Magic were an up-and-coming team. And that Magic group was seen as the team in that 2-year hiatus from Jordan that was seen as a team that was going to take over for the Bulls and run the East. But like I said, Jordan came back and they took over. So, and that group ultimately got broken up when Shaq left Orlando, went to LA, and we all know what became of him there. Penny Hardaway had some injury issues. He wasn't, we didn't really get to see that many years of him as the guy coming out of Memphis, who starred in that movie Blue Chips with Shaq. I feel like that's a sports movie that doesn't get talked about a lot. Love that movie, but just saying. That's another thing you missed from the 90s, Blue Chips. But I hope that was the 90s. Yeah. But yeah, that I've always said that Penny Hardaway could have had a great career if he had stayed healthy. I'm trying to think of like a comparison. They basically compared Penny Hardaway to Magic Johnson because they were bigger point guards. Penny was like 6'9" playing point guard, whereas Magic, I think, was 6'10" or something. So I low-key feel like when I watched old stuff with Johnson and them, I kind of never really looked at him as being 6'10", but I digress. But yeah, so Penny Hardaway, Shaq, that Magic team, missed them from the 90s because they are another fun team to watch. I mean, fast break with Penny on one wing. You had 3D on the other wing waiting for the defense to collapse, kick it out to him. And if they kind of ran out towards him, you usually had Shaq running down the middle. And if he got it down the middle, everybody just had to get out the way because he was going to throw it down on somebody. So, another fun team to watch back then. Another thing definitely missed from the 90s was Phoenix Suns. The Suns, another team like Seattle, where they made the finals 1 year, went up against the Bulls, lost. But that Suns team had Barkley. So this was Barkley after he left Philly. And I think that was his MVP year. So Barkley really put himself on the map. He was a guy back then who would post up a lot, yes. But he had a mid-range game. And I believe that at that time he developed a three-point shot. Now, he wasn't like a dead-eye three-point shooter, but if I remember that playoff run, he made big three-pointers. I remember the one he did against San Antonio in the playoffs. Can't remember which game it was, but it was during their playoff series, and it was a last-second shot. I believe it was him. David Robinson was guarding him. And Barkley basically was just dribbling at the top of the key, looking David Robinson dead in his eye. Did a quick little step back, pull up three, won the game for them. But yeah, but that team was more than Barkley. You had Kevin Johnson, who I think is an underrated point guard in, I guess, the historical sense. Because Kevin Johnson was like a Steve Francis, had good handles. Was not afraid getting in the lane. He would dunk on big men. He dunked on Elijah one, I believe, in that playoff run as well. And I remember that game because I think he was out in the corner, left corner, up faked, went baseline, and just went up, threw it down on Elijah one, got pumped up. And another thing, quick side note with 90s again, I feel like the arenas back then were just nut houses because, like, the Seattle arena, I want to say that was, I was going to say Key West, but that wasn't their arena name. I think it was Key something, but that arena was a great arena on TV. Bulls of the United Center, great. Of course, Madison Square Garden was a different thing, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Boston Garden, great. You had the Lakers out at the Forum. Yeah, it was still the Forum then. It didn't become Staples Center until, I believe, the 2000s. So, it was still the Forum. Portland's arena was great. You had Indiana, you had the Pacers at Market Square. Orlando's arena. Like, there's a lot of great arenas back then. And not saying there aren't great ones now, because Staples Center, you got a pretty good crowd. The TD Garden with the Celtics, pretty good. Madison Square Garden, when the Knicks are good, still a good place. Oracle, or it's not Oracle anymore, with the Warriors. Yeah, there's still a few out there. But we had the Suns teams back then. Barkley, Kevin Johnson. You had Dan Marley, the three-point shooter. Cedric Ceballos, who everybody remembers from the dunk contest when he had the blindfold over his eye. There was a lot of talk that he could see through the blindfold, but hey, don't rain on that man's parade. It was still a dope thing back then. Who else? Yeah, Paul Westfall's the coach. Yeah. I mean, that year, like I said, they went to the finals in 93 against the Bulls. Barkley wins MVP. As we knew, later on, like Jordan was not happy about that and basically took it out on them in that series. So, yeah, loved watching those teams play. That's another thing. I feel like for an era of the 90s where everybody looks at it as a slowed down version of the game, there were actually some teams that did like to get out into transition and would put up points. Sure, it's probably not like points like today, but that's only because you didn't have like 33-point shots back then. You might get 5 or 6 during the game if you're lucky. So, yeah, let's just keep going. What else did I miss from the 90s? Oh, I just talked about them. The Houston Rockets. The Rockets. What's there to say about them? I mean, Olajuwon, who I think gets underrated in terms of big men, was... I mean, I could say before Shaq goes to LA and becomes Shaq. And of course, I didn't watch Bill Russell. I didn't watch Wilt Chamberlain, so I can't really talk about them. But Olajuwon in a group of like he, Alonzo Mourning, Patrick Ewing, basically a lot of Georgetown guys. I mean, Olajuwon didn't go to Georgetown, but Mourning, Ewing. Those are 2 big ones, but there's another Georgetown guy. Oh, Mutombo. You know, back when big men basically lived in the paint. Oh, David Robinson. I talked about him earlier, but yeah, I thought Olajuwon was head and shoulders better than all of them. And it was mainly because Olajuwon was kind of like he had kind of like guard instincts as a center because he had crazy footwork. He actually had pretty good handles for a big man. He had great touch around the rim. He could shoot the mid-range. He could shoot deep twos. I don't really remember him shooting threes. He might have shot a couple, but he had a great all-around game. He would give like some of the greatest battles you would see were between him, David Robinson, and he and Shaq. It was just a game of chess between the two of them because Shaq was bigger, of course, but Olajuwon was a lot quicker and had a lot of up fake, up and unders type stuff. So he'd give Shaq headaches. But then he'd go up against David Robinson, and Robinson was a skinnier guy, probably just as athletic. But Olajuwon would face up against him and just shoot jump shots in his face all day, or face up fake, go in the middle for like a little half hook, or his patented dream shake where he would take a dribble into the middle, turn his back to you, do the shake, and either turn over his left shoulder or his right shoulder. So I think the story was Olajuwon was a soccer player back in, I don't want to get the wrong country. I know he's from somewhere in Africa. I don't want to be, somewhere in Africa. Can't remember the country right now. But I think he was like a goalkeeper. And I think this is around the time when they started doing their what program was that, like Basketball Without Borders or something, and they were really starting to like build up the African talent. And I mean, because of that program, you're seeing what's happened to it now. You got Serge Ibaka, Pascal Siakam, Giannis. I mean, yes, Giannis is a Greek freak, but Giannis has roots in Africa. You had, I feel like I'm missing the guy. I mean, there's several of them, but yeah, that program has really done a lot of things over there. And I guess that can lead into another thing you missed from the 90s was the Dream Team, which turned the NBA game from just being like U.S. major sport into a global sport, because that Dream Team brought in fans from China, from Russia, all the African nations, from a lot of the European nations, Spain, France, Germany, all that. And you see where that's, the roots that were planted then, what they turn into, where you have Euro basketball. Like I just said, basketball without borders in Africa, and the influx of players coming from there. You have big Asian influence now, Yao Ming. You had like Jeremy Lin, a couple of the guys came in from there. And Chinese basketball now is where a lot of American players who, if their career kind of burns out here, they go over there, become great stars. Stephon Marbury's going on over there, basically become like a Michael Jordan over there. And now you're seeing players repping Chinese company shoes and all that kind of stuff. So, big influence there. So that was another thing I missed from the 90s was the Dream Team. But quick little note on the Rockets. Yeah, so the 2 years where Jordan was not a factor with the Bulls, the Rockets ended up, breaking through that bubble, winning back-to-back. So like I said, Olajuwon, clear-cut star of that team. But you had Kenny Smith, who you see on Inside the NBA and TNT all these years now. He was a big part of that team. Was actually in a slam dunk contest, which, I mean, yeah, that was early in his career. Once he got to Houston, he was more of a three-point threat. You had a young Robert Horry, who, with the Rockets, was more of a slash to the rim guy. I mean, of course, as his career went on, he became a big three-point shooter. So he did that with Houston too, but he was more of a slash guy. Who else was on that team? Oh yeah, they had Clyde Drexler too. I think Drexler was Drexler? No, Drexler came later than that. I'm sorry. Yeah, Drexler was on the Rockets teams when like Barkley got there, and then they had Pippen there, but that was I think 2000s. I will do that in another episode, by the way. 2000s NBA. What I miss about that. But focus on the 90s, so Drexler was not there. Drexler was still in Portland. I'll talk about it in a little bit. But yeah, so Houston was another team that seemed like, because after they winning back-to-back, a lot of people thought that they were going to be the next team to go with three-peat. But it didn't happen because Jordan the Bulls picked back up. And then, I guess, quick side here. So for the 90s, like, think of this. The teams that won titles in the 90s. So the Pistons won in 90, which is their back-to-back with the 89 title. I'll talk about the Pistons too. But the Bulls won 91 and 93, 3 in a row. The Rockets win 94 and 95, back-to-back. And the Bulls come back 96 to 98, another 3 in a row. And then you get the Spurs in 99. So basically, it was Pistons, Bulls, Rockets, Bulls, the whole decade. Crazy to think about, but yeah, Rockets missed them. I mean, I guess I have to talk about the Jazz. So here's my thing with the Jazz. We'll see how you guys I guess, take this, but I know a lot of people liked the Jazz teams back then. I wasn't that big of a fan. And it's probably not for the reasons that you may be thinking of. I was not that big of a fan of Karl Malone. I don't know what it was about him, but he just wasn't entertaining to me. I mean, he was a power forward. There were so many other power forwards I'd rather watch. Shawn Kemp was one. Barkley, like Phoenix Barkley, loved watching him. There's other ones, but I'm just making sure I'm not screwing them up with like 2,000 guys. Well, you had Webber back then. Yeah, Chris Webber, loved watching him. As I've said plenty of times, I tried to model my game after Chris Webber. Yet KG, later in the 90s, rather watched him. Malone, it was just, maybe it's more because of the Utah system. Like when when your team played against Utah, you knew what you're going to get all day. You're going to get Stockton, Malone, pick and roll. Yes, we get it. A little bit of Jeff Hornacek mixed in. And that was kind of it. Now they did get to those finals back-to-back years. When they went up against the Bulls, they lost. They lost 4-2 both years. But, I get it. Karl Malone is, second in scoring all time, which is probably something you wouldn't think of. But, he put up buckets. But it seemed like late in games, he was kind of known for missing big free throws. He wasn't the most athletic guy. He was a big guy, but athletically he was really stiff. I don't know. It was just something about him I didn't really care for it. Stockton, I was cool with Stockton because I knew Stockton was a guy who could have put up more points for that team, but I mean, he just played the role that was it Jerry Sloan put him in, where they were really Karl Malone focused and Stockton was just the assist guy. He did hit big shots. Later on found out that he was kind of a trash talker too, which I wouldn't have thought, but yeah, Stockton I was cool with. Hornacek, you could take him or leave him, but I wasn't that mad at Hornacek. And who else was on the team? Well, Brian Russell, but he was just a guy. They had Chris Morris, Antoine Carr. Yeah, that's about it. But yeah, I wasn't a big fan of the Jazz team, so I don't really miss them. But since I'm talking 90s, I do think you do got to talk about them at least. So there you go. You had Portland. And as I said, Portland's arena was a great atmosphere watching them on TV. And those Portland teams, they had Drexler, they had Terry Porter, Clifford Robinson. I was a big Clifford Robinson fan. I will say that. I don't even know why, but I liked watching him play. Always liked the Blazer jerseys. They had that black, red, with the red numbers and all that stuff. Blazer jerseys always looked cool in the 90s. I always liked their court. Paint area was the white. I think the 2-point inside the arc was black, I think so. And I think the center circle was red with, I don't know, I can't remember, but the court looked dope on TV. Yeah, Drexler. I mean, who didn't like watching Drexler? He would take off. He always looked like he was just gliding in the air. He had like long arms, so it always looked effortless with him. He'd make tough layups look ridiculously easy. He would dunk on guys. Yeah, big fan of Drexler. Yeah, Portland. Yes, loved watching them. Like I said, the Pistons won in 90 over Portland. I mean, at that point, the Pistons bad boy teams were they were on their last leg. I wasn't all that into Detroit basketball, gotta be honest. Like, I did watch it more later on, but back then I didn't really watch the Pistons like that. I mean, the bad boys, we knew about them. You had Isaiah Thomas, Bill Laimbeer, who I could not stand Bill Laimbeer. When I did watch, I didn't watch them a lot. But I did see them, of course, so wasn't a big fan of Bill Laimbeer. I know Isaiah Thomas is not liked by a lot of guys around the league. I didn't have a problem with him. I mean, watching him, I thought he was cool to watch. He was a tougher point guard. He would kill you in the mid-range for sure. He could get to the hoop, make tough layups. They had Joe Dumars. Always liked Joe Dumars. Yeah, that was, like I said, that was the last legs before Grant Hill's Pistons took over. And they didn't have the success of the bad boys. But, like I said, I started with Grant Hill, loved him. Wish he did not get hurt in that playoff series where he played on the broken foot. Was never the same. And from the what was that series on TNT with the Inside the NBA guys? Oh my god, I watched all the videos so many times where they talk about like their all-decade team and all that kind of stuff. Well, the title slips on mine, but yeah. I remember Grant Hill did an episode on there, and they were talking about the 90s, so of course he was on there. And there's a point where they're talking, and he takes off his shoe and the socks. He shows his foot. I mean, it is just gross right now, because his ankles basically is constantly a swollen balloon. And yeah, so all because of that playoff series playing on the bad foot, him never being the same. So, like I said, miss Grant Hill being the guy he should have been. And he was supposed to be the next Jordan. So, a lot of pressure there, but it seemed like he was the guy to do it. Let's see, 90s. Like I said, it was just certain teams. Definitely miss rivalries from the 90s. Knicks Pacers. If you want something to watch on YouTube, watch Knicks Pacers. You will enjoy yourself. Miss Reggie Miller. Reggie Miller was my guy in the 90s. His battles with Spike Lee still make me laugh today. And the fact that, players like that just showed that personality on the court. Loved it. You had, it's like I said, yeah, Reggie Miller hitting big three after big three. I mean, if your team went up against him, he did kind of get on your nerves because later in his career, he got really good at the whole taking the jump shot, kick my legs out, get hit, get the foul, so it'd frustrate you. But, I mean, you just had to respect him because you knew it was in the rules and he was just taking advantage of it, so you couldn't be mad. Yeah, that rivalry, John Starks, you got the Davis boys, was it Dale Davis, Antonio Davis, you had Charles Oakley, Anthony Mason, you had Rick Smits and Patrick Ewing. great little rivalry they had there. But yeah, so Miller and Starks, good little back and forth. I mean, even the Knicks against John Starks was entertaining to watch in the 90s because they would be on him whenever he started to go off and do kind of stupid stuff. Great rivalry. Heat and the Knicks, another great rivalry. I think that was 90s. Or am I jumping ahead to 2000? Actually, that might be 2000, so scratch that. We'll talk about that one, the 2000s one. But you had Houston, San Antonio. So you had Olajuwon, David Robinson. You had Shawn Elliott, Robert Horry, Kenny Smith. Who was Kenny Smith's backcourt mate? Was Vernon Maxwell? Yeah, Vernon Maxwell was a psycho. Just calling it like I saw it. That dude was crazy on the court. But they worked well together, so they were great. You had Portland and the Lakers. That was early 90s. Only because the Lakers are kind of at the end of their run with Magic and all of them. But Portland was the up-and-coming team, so they had a great few years. But yeah, because 89, I mean, this is 80s, but, 89, the Lakers lost to the Pistons. 90, the Trailblazers lost to the Pistons. 91, the Lakers lost to the Bulls. And then 92, the Blazers lost to the Bulls. So those two teams, I mean, were tied together early in the 90s. Phoenix and Houston, good rivalry. Barkley, Olajuwon, Kevin Johnson, going against Vernon Maxwell. So yeah, there's some other ones in there. Seattle and Utah, good rivalry too. Kemp versus Malone, Gary Payton and John Stockton, yes, that was must see. So yeah, 90s was about great rivalries, great animosity. Missed that from today's game, where everybody's buddy with everybody. Trying to see what else. I mean, like I said, there was a lot to the 90s, and when I hear some of the slander against the 90s, it always makes me sick because 90s basketball was just where it was at. I feel like there's some other teams to talk about real quickly. I want to say, I think the Warriors. Yeah, because Chris Webber was on the Warriors then. I believe they still had Tim Hardaway, who, gotta talk about Tim Hardaway for a little bit. I mentioned Tim Hardaway before, but Tim Hardaway, I feel like, was one of the more underappreciated point guards in NBA history. I said it before, I'm not going to say it again, but I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole thing again, but I copied Tim Hardaway's crossover, so I always watched him. But I believe there were a couple of years there where it was Hardaway, Chris Webber. I think Chris Mullin was still there. I mean, Chris Mullin was a great sharpshooter, and most Hardaway teams like to get out and run in transition, and they, I mean, yeah, it had to be 90s, because when Webber dunked on Barkley, when he went behind the back, they just threw it down on him. Barkley was still with the Suns at that point. So yeah. Loved watching the Warriors. No, I mean, that group was low key one of my probably one of my favorite teams to watch back then were the Warriors. I just love their up and down nature. Let's see who else. I was gonna say the Kings. I think that was 2000s by the time Webber got to the Kings and they really took off. So I'll say that one. I mean, you had Philly, but Philly didn't really take off till the 2000s, so I won't talk about them either. Yeah, Webber got to the Kings very end of the 90s. Might have been like 99. But yeah, I'll save that for the 2000s talk. But yeah, I mean, that was just kind of some of the stuff I missed from the 90s. I just want to talk to you guys about it for a little bit. You guys can definitely let me know if you think I'm overrating the 90s. I mean, I guess for historical context, well, I can't really say historical, but for my lifetime, I would be, so let me see, I would be putting the 90s up against, I mean, I only had half of the 80s, so I can't really count the 80s. I guess I can. Well, no, I won't count the 80s. I mean, I watch enough of the 80s stuff now from YouTube and, like I said, ESPN Classic and stuff that I have a pretty good handle on how the 80s went, but putting the 90s up against 2000s, 2010s, I probably wouldn't be lying to say I'd put 90s at number one. Just gotta be honest with you. But yeah, so like I said, hate hearing slander against the 90s only because they assume it was just Jordan and the Bulls were the only team back then. There were so many other teams, but I mean, I went through enough of them for you in this episode so you can kind of see. But yeah, I think that's a good place to end this one. So like I said, you can follow the show on Twitter at Chompin Podcast. You let me know if I'm, like I said, overrating the 90s. If you think I may have not even have sold it as high as I should have, let me know. Let me know if there's any teams of the 90s that I may have missed that you were a fan of. I know there were some other ones in there. I know some people liked the Hawks back then with, Dominique, Steve Smith, Mookie Blaylock. I did like Mookie Blaylock, but yeah. Actually, I just realized I didn't even talk about my Celtics in the 90s. And, I mean, it was the end of Larry Bird. And, they had the whole Reggie Lewis thing, which Reggie Lewis was another guy who I would have loved to see what his career would have been, because he was going to be the perfect segue from Bird's team. It was going to be Reggie Lewis's team. There was no question about it. Reggie Lewis was, I think from his rookie year, people were starting to really notice how good he was. And then, I mean, I remember that game against the Hornets, as I said, had Alonzo Mourning and guys like that on that team, when it was a simple rebound, going to the other end of the court, Reggie Lewis just stumbling, falling to the ground. He laid there for a little bit. Then when he got up, they took him to the bench. He had this look on his face where he was just freaked out. And ultimately, led to his unfortunate passing and all that kind of stuff. So I remember all that and how devastating that was to the city of Boston. like I said, he was a good guy. He was a great player on the court. I think he even had a couple of battles with Jordan. He had some with Reggie Miller, and he was holding his own as a young guy. So, I mean, yeah. I mean, it was such a thing that they named he had the Reggie Lewis Track Center up there. I think it's still there. I mean, I'm assuming it's still there. I hadn't heard that it's been like renamed or anything. So, but yeah, that was definitely tough. But yeah, just had to throw that in there. Can't believe I went this whole time not talking about the Celtics, but yeah. So, like I said, let me know if there's any other teams I may have missed talking about in this episode. And, give me your thoughts about 90s game compared to today. Because like I said, defense in the 90s was more at a premium because guys were able to use their hands on defense, which was easier to, steer offensive players where they wanted to go. More physical game. It was a game I like to play because physical play leads to great trash talk. And who doesn't like basketball trash talk? So, I mean, that's where I'm coming from. But, like I said, I will do an episode some point next week. Maybe it'll be next Saturday. I don't know. Where I'll talk about 2000s basketball. I was a big fan of 2000s basketball as well. And then, maybe the following week I might do 2010. But, yeah, if you want, I guess you can let me know some 2000s era teams. So I'm giving you right now that you want me to definitely include. Let me know that as well. Yeah, so we'll definitely bring you an episode tomorrow. Not really sure what I'll talk about yet. I mean, I know as we're getting into March, I will start doing some college basketball stuff because I have been watching some college basketball lately to try to get myself ready for the tournament. And I have noticed some teams that are really jumping, off the screen at me that I see as potential teams to win it all. So we'll start talking about some of that come March. Because the tournament starts with March. Starts with middle of March, like the 16th or something. So, yeah, we'll definitely start getting into a college basketball mood on here. Spring training and baseball starts tomorrow. I don't know how many of you that really interests or whatever, but I will do some baseball talk on here every once in a while. Probably not during spring training because spring training baseball is it is what it is. But as we get closer to the end of March, then we'll start kind of ramping up baseball talk as we get into the regular season. I mean, no NFL trades have really gone down yet. I feel like some are going to come with some of these quarterbacks that may be on the move. So we'll have some NFL stuff still to talk about. I'll still work NFL in as well. I think I'll do NFL tomorrow. What NFL wise, I don't know. I might do something like what I did today with some type of ranking or something like that. Maybe we'll look at quarterbacks going into the off season or something like that. I'll figure it out, but we'll talk NFL tomorrow for sure. So, if you're new here, hopefully you liked the episode, like what you heard. As I said, follow the show, Twitter, Chompin Podcast. Subscribe to this show wherever you are listening. I mean, it's available wherever you listen to podcasts, most likely. No, at this point, I think it is available everywhere. So hit the subscribe button, leave a review, you can comment. I know some of my SoundCloud people, they do leave some comments. So as I said, I will respond to comments as well. So definitely do that. And, you can share the experience with someone. Let them know about the show. Try to grow the audience. I mean, we're getting closer to 100th episode. So definitely a lot more to come. So, definitely stick with it. And we'll continue to have some fun. But thanks again for tuning in. Be safe out there for sure. God bless. And I will catch you on the next episode. All right.